Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Tiffany, and today we're going to be learning about a pretty important habitat. But before we get started with that, I want to make sure that you are able to interact during this experience. So if you are watching us live, it is Wednesday at 9 a.m. If you're watching this live, I encourage you to text in any questions or observations that you may have. Whether you are in class or at home, ask an adult if it's okay for you to text us in. That phone number is 562-286-1838 to text us live. Now, if you are watching this on YouTube, further down the road, we still would love to hear from you on any observations or questions that you have about this episode. But instead of texting us, please email us at live@lvaop.org. So you can see that phone number and that email right here on the screen, and we'll leave that up throughout the program. All right. So I said that we are going to be learning about this important habitat. What is this habitat? Now, a habitat, in case you are unfamiliar with that word, is just a home for an animal. Now, looking at this kelp forest, do you see? Yes, this is the word habitat. So this habitat is called a kelp forest, and I said habitat is a home for an animal. Do we see any animals in here? Ooh, I think I saw some fish back here. Now, if this is an important habitat, an important animal home, why aren't we seeing a whole lot of animals? What are we seeing? What is this stuff? This is kelp. Now, kelp is a type of algae. I like to think of it as similar to a plant. It's not exactly a plant, but it's very similar to a plant. This kelp here gets its energy, see all that trickling down? All of that sunlight? It gets its energy, its food source, from the sunlight. Just like plants on land do photosynthesis to get their energy. They take energy from the sun, and then they are able to make their own food, their own sugars. This is how this algae, this kelp, survives and creates its own food. Now, plants on land have roots that go into the soil, and those roots also help to absorb nutrients and absorb water. This is where this kelp and land plants sort of differ. They do have something that looks like roots, but it does not function as roots. I have some here to show you. This is called the holdfast of the kelp. This just holds on so that the kelp doesn't drift away with the motion of the ocean. This will hold on to, do you think it's going to hold on to the sand? No. One characteristic of areas that have these kelp forests is that they have a rocky coastline, so that the kelp can actually hold on into little cracks and crevices in the rocks. So if this was trying to hold on to the sand, it would probably just still go away with the motion of the ocean, right? A wave would come by and take away that kelp if it was just holding on to the sand. The sand won't be much to hold on to, but holding on to a rock, it's going to stay sturdy. So that is something where this kelp forest and plants that we have on land kind of differ. Plants on land have those roots that help with nutrients, help get water to the plant, versus what looks like roots for the kelp is actually just the holdfast and used only to hold on to the rock so that it stays in its place. Now, something that I find amazing about at least giant kelp is how fast it can grow. Have any of you ever tried to garden at home? A few of you? Nice. Well, I've tried to garden at home, and I get pretty impatient trying to wait for those plants to grow. They grow so slow. Not with this giant kelp. This giant kelp can grow almost 2 feet in a day. It grows really, really fast. You can almost watch it grow. When it grows, it's going to grow from the bottom all the way up to the surface. And then once it reaches the surface, think it starts growing outside of the water? No. What happens is it just flops over onto the surface of the water and continues to grow horizontally. You can almost see that here in this video as well. So this video that we are looking at, this is actually in the ocean, a real kelp forest. Here, this is an exhibit that we have at the aquarium, and you can see how this kelp was growing up, but then it reached the surface of the water, and so now it's growing off to the side, and it's just going to continue to grow. But how does it grow up? Plants on land, they have their stems, or a tree has a really sturdy trunk, and that's what helps them to grow up against the force of gravity. But this seaweed, it's pretty floppy. How many of you have gone to the beach before? Shout it out or raise a hand. Okay, a lot of you have gone to the beach before. Now, have you ever seen some seaweed on the beach before? Yeah, and it probably had some bugs and flies flying around it, maybe even smelled a little bit. Yeah, I've seen that too. But it's pretty floppy, right? It's not going to be able to stand tall against gravity like plants on land. So how is it that this plant is able to grow up towards the surface of the water where the sunlight is growing from? Now, the key to that reminds me of when I was learning to swim, or maybe when you were learning to swim when we were little kids. When you were little and trying to learn how to swim, did you ever wear floaties on your arms? I wore some floaties on my arms. You put them on your arms, and it's almost like having a balloon or a beach ball on your arm, right? And by having that pocket of air around your arm, it helps you to stay afloat, at least your arms, right? So you can try to learn how to swim, but you weren't going to sink beneath the water because you had these floaties on, these little air bubbles basically on your arms to help you float around in the water. And it was a safe way to enjoy the water. Well, our kelp also wears floaties. Can you see the floaties on this kelp? Do you think this is it? Nah, that's kind of similar to like a leaf. This, do you see all these? It looks like balls or maybe even eggs. All of these right there. Those are filled with air, and those help the kelp to stay afloat. Because instead of having to fight gravity like plants on land, this kelp just needs the ability to float up towards the surface, closer to the sun, so that it can do photosynthesis. So you can see that this stalk of kelp has a lot of these little air pockets to help it float up to the surface so that it can continue to survive and thrive and do photosynthesis. Pretty cool. And look at it. So perfect. Floating across the top of the water here. Okay, so kelp. This big old kelp forest, just like we have forests on land. We saw that forest before. It was a really dense forest. It's similar to a plant, but not quite. It has its own built-in floaties so that it can come up to the surface and do photosynthesis here. But I said it's an important habitat, an important home for animals. So let's look at some of those animals that call this kelp forest, or call kelp forests in general, home. Okay, we are now looking at blue cavern. Now this is an exhibit that we have here at the aquarium, but it's modeled off of a real dive site off the coast of Catalina. So this is local. So I'm right now in Long Beach, California, and if you are also in Southern California, this is, jump in the ocean, this is what you'll see, a kelp forest. This is our local ocean habitat. So we see, again, that kelp, and maybe you'll actually notice, I see some different types of seaweed in here. Do you notice how this is a dark green and we have some large leaves on those versus, ooh, that's a light green. This is almost like a green-brown over here. There are many, many different types of algae, many different types of seaweed that can grow in these kelp forests. But what's a big difference between this kelp forest and the one that we saw before? Now we are seeing some more animals. Take a couple of moments, and I want you to put on your scientist eyes and make some observations about what you see. What are the animals doing? What do they look like? How big? You can even predict. How big do you think these animals are? You think we're looking at small fish? Medium fish? Large fish? So take a couple of moments and with your scientist eyes, let's make some observations. What are we looking at? What do we see? Maybe share with someone that's sitting next to you. And don't forget that you can also, if interested with an adult, you can text us your observations as well to 562-286-1838. What are you noticing? What is in this habitat? Earlier, I saw some of my favorite fish in this exhibit hanging out over here, but I don't see them anymore. I wonder why they swam away. Oh, we can still see one of them right here. Do you see that little orange fish? That is called a Garibaldi. That is the marine state fish of California. Now, this fish really stands out in that kelp forest, doesn't it? What did you notice? What were the colors of all the fish in the kelp forest? You might have noticed there was lots of grays and browns, right? Because what's the color of the habitat? We got some gray, we got some green, and so for the most part, the animals' coloring matches the habitat. That is called camouflage. That helps the animal to blend in and maybe predators can't see them. But that Garibaldi, an orange fish with a gray and green and maybe even blue background, this animal is going to stand out for sure, isn't it? Now, sometimes in nature, when animals have a really bright coloring, it's a warning. Think about, have you ever seen or heard about little poison frogs in the Amazon? They are beautiful, bright colors. That's to warn predators. Hey, you don't want to mess with me. I am poisonous. Now, do you think this fish here is venomous or poisonous or anything like that? It's not. So why does it have such a bright coloring? It's still a warning. Let's go back and look at Blue Cavern if we can see this Garibaldi's behavior. Oh, of course, when I want to talk about them, they are all gone. But earlier, there was a very large fish here. And that very large fish is called a giant sea bass. Ooh, okay, we've gone back in time. So pay attention to this giant sea bass here. And then pay attention once that Garibaldi moves on over. So this giant sea bass, very large fish and an important player in this habitat. But watch what happens when this little fish, yeah, do you see that? A little bully. Even though that fish is so small, they are very territorial. And they will go up to big fish, even people, as they are scuba diving or snorkeling and say, hey, I don't want you in my area. Now, do you think they're actually talking? No, that's just me giving them some words. But you can see that it has pretty big lips, not necessarily teeth, but pretty big lips. So it gave that giant sea bass a little bite, and it's just kind of being mean, right? Being kind of a jerk and saying, like, biting and wanting that fish out of its area. What it has decided is its area. So then we start to see this giant sea bass is like, nope, I do not want to deal with this little fish, not today, and is swimming off. So what is this bright color for? It is still a warning, and it is warning other animals, basically, of the attitude of this little fish. Crazy, huh? And that is our marine state fish here in California. Now, that giant sea bass that we were just looking at, it blends in pretty well, I'd say, with rocks. Right? Look at the color of this animal. We see some grays, we see some black, and when it was hanging out in Blue Cavern, we saw that it could have looked like a rock. As people, we have some pretty good eyesight. But if you were an ocean animal that maybe didn't have as great of eyesight, this definitely looks like a rock. Now, this animal can get very, very big. It has a very long lifespan, and it continues to grow and grow and grow throughout its life. So it could be several hundreds and hundreds of pounds and up to like 7 or 8 feet long. Huge, huge fish. That's because it can live about 80 years. The ones that we just saw in Blue Cavern were more around 30 years and a couple hundred pounds. Still a very, very big fish, but they will definitely continue to grow in their life. So this big fish, do you think it swims very fast? In Blue Cavern, we did see some fish that could swim around fast, but this one, did you see it swim very fast? No, with all that weight, it's kind of slow, kind of bulky. So how is it going to catch food if it can't chase down some fast fish? The secret is in that camouflage. Not only do animals camouflage to hide from predators, they can also use camouflage to hide from their prey. This animal is just hanging out towards the bottom of the water, almost pretending to be a rock, right? It can hang out and then open. See this really, really big mouth? Open this really big mouth really, really fast and kind of suck in its prey. Now, this animal, for the most part, it doesn't really have any natural predators. This animal is at the top of its food chain, the top of its food web in the kelp forest where we can find these giant sea bass. But, unfortunately, that means that they weren't too scared of people when people came to fish these animals. Yeah, so we can see that this giant sea bass here, off in a natural kelp forest with that natural kelp forest background. And so they were hunted to a point that they are on the endangered species list. But here at the aquarium, we have worked to raise some baby giant sea bass and then release them back into their natural habitat. And we've released hundreds of these giant sea bass. Now, the cool thing about giant sea bass, we saw that they are spotted, right? Each one has a unique spot pattern. So if we take a picture, here's a picture of a baby giant sea bass. They look very different from the adults, don't they? We see that, okay, we still have those spots, but this top dorsal fin, wow, that looks pretty different. The fins back here are clear, and overall, they look kind of brown-green. Now think about the adult. The adult is hanging out, pretending to be a rock so it can surprise, eat some food. But if you are a tiny baby fish, about this big, you're probably on the menu for bigger fish. So that little baby actually blends in well with the kelp. And that type of camouflage is what helps that little baby animal to survive until it gets bigger, and then it starts looking gray and looking more like a rock. But back to the pattern, so we see that this giant sea bass has this spot pattern, and each spot pattern is going to be unique for each individual fish, just like how our fingerprints are unique to us. So if we take a picture of this giant sea bass, and then years and years later, we're scuba diving and we are also taking more pictures of giant sea bass, we can match up pictures and see if the patterns are the same. If the patterns are the same in the two photos, we are seeing the exact same individual, which is pretty cool. So when we release sea bass into their natural habitat, we can kind of keep track and see if we see those same individuals from the aquarium again. That's pretty cool. Okay, so giant sea bass, important part of their habitat because they are at the top of that food chain. Now let's meet some other players in the kelp forest. When it comes to, I talked a little bit about food chain and a food web. When it comes to those things, what is the source of all energy? What kicks off the food chain? It's going to be the sun. Remember, we saw that beautiful sunlight trickling down, and that sun gives energy to the kelp forest. Let me actually draw this out. So we said the sun, this will be my sun. The sun gives energy to the kelp. Here's the sun. It's a bright, beautiful, sunny day over the ocean. And I have some rocks here because that's important for the kelp to be able to hold on. And I have some kelp. You know what? My kelp has been growing really, really well, and it's flopping over onto the surface. So here's my kelp. Can't forget that hold fast. Gotta hold on to that rock. So the sun gives energy through photosynthesis to the kelp. But then there's got to be an animal that eats the kelp, right? We call that an herbivore or a consumer. So let's see an animal that eats kelp. Is this what you were expecting? This isn't what I was expecting. Does this look like an animal to you? I don't see any eyes. I don't see a mouth. Are we sure this isn't a rock? No, this is a sea urchin, specifically a purple sea urchin. And it is, in fact, an animal because it does eat food. And what does it eat? Kelp. Its mouth is on the bottom. I think it looks kind of something like this. And it's just going to munch that kelp. Now, that's a good thing. We can't have too much growth in the kelp forest. We do need sea urchins. And you can even see on this blade of kelp that little air bubble that we were talking about before. We do need sea urchins to kind of clear out little pieces of the kelp forest so we don't have too much growth, too dense of a forest. So sea urchins are good, but if nothing is eating the sea urchins, then we could have a problem. Let me add some sea urchins over to my kelp forest that I'm drawing over here. Here's some little urchins. They're hanging out on the kelp, hanging out on the rocks. Okay, now something has to eat these urchins. Otherwise, these urchins are going to eat the entire kelp forest. If the urchins eat the entire kelp forest, there's no more kelp forest habitat, right? we saw that there was a lot of other fish that live in that kelp forest. If the urchins eat the whole forest, we have a big, big problem on our hands. Now, looking at that sea urchin, do you want to eat that sea urchin? No. Imagine trying to eat that sea urchin. Sea urchins to me feel like a ball of toothpicks. Each one of those spines kind of feels like a toothpick. You want to try and bite that like an apple? No. And guess what? Most animals in the ocean also share that same feeling with you. This is too difficult to eat. But one of my favorite sea animals that doesn't live here in Southern California, but more Central California, loves to eat these animals. And that is the sea otter. So sea otters, so cute. They have these little paws and they got some pretty sharp teeth, but that's not what gives them the ability to eat these urchins. What actually gives them the ability to eat these urchins is the fact that they can use tools. They can use a rock and use their stomach kind of as a little table, and they can hit that urchin with the rock to get all the spines off, to open it up and eat the meat inside. So their ability to use tools helps to keep the kelp forest in balance. Now, I said if nothing ate the urchins, that we would lose the entire kelp forest. I actually have a video of what's called an urchin barren. And that urchin barren is, or was, a kelp forest, but then the urchins took over. There was nothing in that area to be able to eat the urchins so that their populations didn't get out of control. Remember I said that the sea otters, take a look at this video. Remember I said that the sea otters don't live here in Southern California. Once upon a time, otter populations were so large that they went all the way up and down the California coast, but now they only live in Central California. This was a beautiful kelp forest like the ones that we saw earlier, but now, do you see any kelp? Not really. Do you see animals besides the urchins? Not really. And this is the fate of kelp forests if there isn't animals that are able to eat the urchin. Let's go back to our little drawing. So, going through the flow of energy, the sun gives energy to the kelp. The kelp then gives energy to the urchin. But then something has to eat the urchin, otherwise the whole habitat collapses. So then we have to have my favorite, the adorable otter. And you know what? Maybe my little otter is holding an urchin as a little snack. Okay, so then from the urchin, we go to the sea otter. So that is just one example of a food chain in this habitat. Now, thankfully, in Southern California, it's not that urchins are going to eat our entire kelp forest. Thankfully, there are other animals that can also eat urchins, like the California sheephead. Yes, this is a California sheephead we have here at the aquarium. Look, that big, strong mouth. That big, strong mouth is able to eat urchins as well. So our Southern California kelp forests are safely protected by sheephead who like to eat urchins. All right, explorers, that is all the time that we have for today. But today we got to learn and explore together a little bit more about our local habitat, the kelp forest, and some of the important animals that call it home. Again, if you have any questions, feel free now to email us at live@lbaop.org. aquariums.org. And teachers, if you are watching today, we would like to know how many students you have in your class, just so that we are better able to serve our communities. If you could text us your class numbers to 562-286-1838. It's been fun exploring with you. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.